Attention, please board the slammer and move to the end of the row. Once seated, please pull the overhead harness down to your shoulders and the lap bar across your waist. Your restraints shall be checked momentarily.
Just hearing that announcement again brings back so many memories of stepping onto one of my favourite ever flat rides. This thing looked absolutely terrifying from off-ride, and you looked at the facial expressions of people waiting in the queue line and watching it spin round and round. You could tell they were petrified to go on it, but people still rode it and experienced it. I am of course talking about Slammer at Thorpe Park. Welcome to the next video in our Remembering series here on Theme Park Worldwide, and like I say, this was one of my favourite ever flat rides and a very unique ride too. In this video I'm going to look back on the history of Slammer and also as well talk about its downfall, why it was removed from the park, lots of technical issues that Slammer became famous for during its last few years, and along with that as well I'm going to share my memories and overall thoughts on what was this absolutely incredible attraction. But let's go right back to the start then. S&S Power, fantastic company, very well known for doing lots of different rides, especially the S&S Shot Tower that can be found all across the world. But in 2003 they opened something a little bit different, the first ever S&S Power Sky Swat, and this was over in the USA in 2003, and this looks absolutely incredible. I remember actually it being built, and I remember seeing it on a documentary at the time with Stan Checkett's from S&S, which was brilliant, and I remember looking at it and think I'd love to ride that. Probably never will get to experience it, but I'd love to at some point. And then 2005 comes along and Thorpe Park, our very own Thorpe Park here in the UK, decides to open the second ever S&S Sky Swat, and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, that's the ride that I wanted to experience a couple of years ago. It's coming to the UK. At that point did a bit more research, because at the time, you know, it was a very new product. Did a bit of research and thought, oh blimey, this is only the second one to be built, and little did I know at the time that that would actually be the last one to be built, because only 2 of these ever operated, and for a period of time the Slammer at Thorpe Park was actually the only one of these operating in the world. But let's go more into Slammer itself. So like I say, it opened in 2005 and it closed at the start of 2017. I love this ride to bits, but you know what, it had so many technical issues, and I'm going to cover that in the video, because like I say, this ride, it operated for just under 12 years at Thorpe Park, so it had a good run, but it's just such a shame it couldn't have lasted that little bit longer. But unfortunately, as you're going to find out in this video, S&S did stop manufacturing this ride, and parts became hard to find, and that was all part of the downfall of this ride and the maintenance issues that it was having all along. Now, in terms of the location at Thorpe Park, it was kind of in between Lost City and Canada Creek. Of course, Canada Creek's now Old Town, but you know, the ride was kind of located there. I say was, the structure itself is still standing. A lot of it's in bits now, but it is still pretty much standing. But yeah, the theme was always interesting for this, because it kind of fit in with both Lost City and also Canada Creek. It was kind of nestled in between the two. From Canada Creek, of course, it fit in with the brown colour scheme and that sort of Wild West feel, but also from Lost City, from over by Colossus, it fit in as well. So yeah, it's one of those that fit in really with both areas. But this thing was absolutely huge, and it was certainly one to enjoy from on-ride and off-ride. I say enjoy on-ride, a lot of people certainly didn't enjoy the experience. This was one of the rides that I'll always have memories from, of people being absolutely petrified. When I first went on it in 2005, I was thinking, oh blimey, what am I doing? And the audio really built up to that experience with Slammer at Thorpe Park. Now, in terms of the queue line, it was just landscape, some trees and tropical planting around, not so much any theming around it, but it didn't really need it, not because of the size of this structure that you were looking at. And let me just talk about the actual ride and how it was set up, because like I say, there's none of these exist anymore in the world now. Now, you actually saw this tower standing there, kind of 2 towers in the middle, but nothing connecting in the middle, and you thought, well, how's this going to work? What actually happened was a huge arm was on the ground, and at each end there was actually different seating. So 24 riders could be sat on each end of Slammer. So you had the 2 sections on the end of this big arm, this big Sky Swat that was going to spin round. Now there was 4 rows. Of course, each row could seat 6 riders. Now, in terms of how this would work, the whole of that structure would lift up on these two towers. That is amazing engineering. I mean, you've got to put it to Stan Checketts and of course S&S Power for actually being able to do this and accomplish it, because it's some amazing engineering, how that whole system, very heavy system, could lift up and then lock into place before spinning round. But before we get onto that, let's just talk about the restraint system that there was on Slammer, because the restraints was certainly very interesting. Now, how it worked was you had a side lowering lap bar that was very similar to what can be found on S&S, on other S&S rides. Their Screaming Swing, of course, they've got one at Thorpe Park out in that same year of 2005. Of course, Rush. But yes, it literally pulls up and then comes across over the top of your waist. Now, with that, it's certainly an interesting restraint system because it doesn't fully lock into place and not move. Like, it locks, but there's still a bit of movement in it, and you'll find that on Rush to this day. If you ride it in 2021, if you just feel the restraint, it wobbles a little bit. It's perfectly safe. That's just how S&S designed them, but that's certainly added to the experience of this, as we'll get onto when I talk about once this ride had lifted up and the overall experience of it. Of course, you couldn't just have a little lap bar like that on this sort of ride. There was also some over-the-shoulder restraints as well, and these pulled down and sat on the shoulders. I never found them to be too uncomfortable, but there would be the odd occasion where the operators would really push down on them and you'd think, oh blimey, that's a bit tight, and you'd feel it when you were spinning round. But you know, again, they had a bit of movement in them. They weren't completely solid. Of course, it was perfectly safe. That was how it was designed, but they could move a little bit as well. Now, when the time came for this ride to dispatch, when the time came is the key words to this, because it took a long time, because you had to have an operator on each side that would have to go and check all the harnesses that side, check them all that side. Bear in mind, there could be up to 24 riders on each side, and along with that, 2 restraints to check. So that's 48 restraints to check on each side. So there is a lot to it, isn't there, really, when you think about how much had to be checked. It also became an issue, especially in its later life, balancing them out and getting the weight issues correct, because at some points I remember they actually had to say to people on a quiet day, you've got to move over to the other side to balance it out. So that wasn't too much of an issue on a busier day or during its early operating life, but especially as it went on, balancing this thing out became even more of a concern. And of course, you know, it was always an issue from day one, but it got more of an issue as the ride aged over the years up until its closure in 2017. Of course, when it was ready to go, you'd see that thumbs up in the operator's cabin, and everybody looked petrified on this ride. I was my first time riding it. I'm sure a lot of you were too. And yeah, just the look on everyone, because you didn't really have many places to hold on either. And there was a little lap bar, of course, that you could hold on to, a little handle on the lap bar and on the over-the-shoulder restraints, but not loads. So people looked pretty petrified on this. What also made it was you could see through the floor as well. It was like these steel grills going across. That was all designed, so of course the air would come through and you'd feel it as you were spinning round. And also as well, any objects that fell onto it would actually fall through instead of hitting the other side and going through. They could actually go through as it spun on its side. They could fall out before it, of course, being whacked into the other side and possibly causing a serious injury with that. But and the design of it was incredible, really, how it lifted up. The audio kick in and you would see it lift up on this tower, which was incredible. I always loved the rising up to that music that they had on there. Fantastic piece of like classical music as it lifted up, but pretty intense as well with the voiceover that was created with that male voice on there. Blimey, it really built up the anticipation. And then once you got to the top, it would lock into place and you'd sit there for a good few seconds whilst the ride worked out what it was going to do. Was it going to go that way or was it going to go that way? And of course that would vary, and of course you'd then start to make your way spinning round. Either you go forwards first or backwards first. I always used to like going forwards first because it was the part of the ride where everybody was thinking, oh, I hope we kind of go backwards. But when you're facing forwards on this and flipped over front facing, oh my God, it was terrifying. And every time I rode it, there was always part of me thinking, blimey, I'm putting a lot of trust in these over-the-shoulder restraints, you know, blimey, if anything happened. Of course, these things were tested rigorously and safety checked, but, you know, it always runs through your mind on something like that where literally there's no way that you could hold on if them restraints come loose. You've got to, you know, you are braced and you're putting your life into that. You could feel your shoulders really sort of push into the tops of these over-the-shoulder restraints that came down here. And oh, blimey, you know, I imagine that's why they kind of designed it with a bit of movement, to be honest, because you could just feel them move and slide a little bit. But I loved when he went over first, and the reactions of people was incredible, and you could kind of look over and see the other riders at points and give them a little wave and think, oh, you know, they're going that way that we just did. And after spinning a few times one way, it would then completely reverse and go the other way as well. And of course, it meant that you got the best experience no matter where you sat, really. I always used to enjoy actually sitting on the side closest to the queue line entrance. So if you were looking at it from facing Colossus, on the left hand side of the slammer, because of the views that you would get flipping over that way, especially for the first time. Honestly, it was absolutely incredible as it's made its way over there. And it was pretty tall as well. When it was spinning round, it would be reaching a height of 105 feet. That's 32 meters. So pretty tall as it's making its way round on the slammer. Now, when it came to the end, you kind of feel like the ride losing its momentum and it would slow down. And then, of course, it would take a while sometimes to level out. And then once it had leveled out, it would then be lowered slowly and back down into its position in the, of course, the two stations on either side, where the 24 riders on each side would step off after a very exhilarating experience. This was an absolutely incredible ride that I loved very much. It was one of my favourite ever flat rides. It was so unique. There was only ever two of them. I only got to experience the one, of course, at Thorpe Park. But you know what? I thought it was fantastic. And what made this ride was that feeling that, you know, what is going to happen? How's it going to feel to literally be swatted towards the ground? And that's what it was. You know, like I say, you felt it on your shoulders so much. Not so much your waist, but on your shoulders when you were going over towards the ground. There was nothing quite like that feeling. It was very strange. It was very surreal as it spun round, because it took it quite slow at first as well. And then by the second and third sort of rotations round, it was picking up the speed, and the views, the feel of it, honestly, it was amazing. And the added fear, them restraints, how they were designed from S&S, that they'd shake a little bit as well. Blimey, it was certainly very different. It really was. Now, let me go on to this ride's closure. So we all thought that it was going to shut in 2012 because signage started to be removed. It was took off the map. I thought, here we go. I'd heard at the time that, of course, S&S had stopped manufacturing them and the parts and stuff for them. And then in 2013, the one in America closed. So I thought, hang on a minute. So Slammer was still operating. 2012, it did end up coming back. And 2013, I thought, that's it. It's going to be the last year. That one's gone now. Slammer's the only one. However, by some miracle, it continued to stay operating for another few years until early 2017, when Thorpe Park confirmed that the ride had come to the end of its life and would close to make way for future development. As of 2021, we're still not seeing any future development on there, but I believe the area is being used as a part of the queue line for Black Mirror, which is opening this year, that new indoor walkthrough attraction. So we'll see what that's like when we step into the park in a few months' time, hopefully, fingers crossed. But yeah, you know, in terms of this ride, during 2012, 13, even 14, there was having a lot of issues, and it got to the point where in the afternoon, the ride would actually have to close for a brief period of time whilst the maintenance team came down and literally checked to make sure that everything was okay. And I actually stood a few times watching them, what they were doing, and they were checking the nuts and bolts on the structure and on the two ends. So it was clear that they had concerns about the structure of it itself. Could there be you know, some issue with that? That's clearly why it closed in the end. You could also see every winter more white marks on the actual structure of it, where you could tell they've been welding it over winter. And it ended up, by the time this ride closed, it was covered in weld marks all the way down the whole thing. It was starting to look more white than it was brown in a lot of places. So when it gets to that point, you know that a ride's got to come to the end of its life. Fair play to Thorpe Park, though, for keeping it running for as long as they could, because I honestly thought 2012 and 13 was the end, but it wasn't. It kept running. And I remember riding it in late 2016, Fright Nights, I think it was, having a night ride on it and thinking, oh, this is one of my last rides. I could tell that it was going to go. I was looking at them welding marks and thought, that's it. But especially watching it and seeing that you know, they've been actually having to go to it and check the bolts to make sure it was structurally sound, you knew that that ride was coming to the end of its life. And I think everybody kind of knew it was coming at some point. Safety is always paramount. It's got to be at the parks, and that was it. That was the end of Slammer. And to this day, like I say, it is still standing. S&S discontinued them, but yeah, we won't see this thing come back, and we'll never see that sort of ride on there again. I'd love to see maybe S&S or another manufacturer designed something like that again with more modern technology, because it was a great ride system, lifting up and spinning round, but obviously in the end it just became too much to maintain, and the structure of it as well was clearly causing issues as well. But there we go, they're my memories from this. I loved it, the forces, the feeling on that feeling of just being smacked straight down towards the ground at great height on this ride, over 100 feet, like I say, and being whacked straight down was incredible. It really was. But unfortunately it's no longer with us, but safety's paramount, and I think we all knew that that was coming, so we had plenty of rides on it during 2016. But there we go. I would love to know your thoughts. Did you experience Slammer at Thorpe Park? Were you too scared to go on it? Did you ride it and was terrified? I would love to know down below in the video comments. Don't forget, there's lots of new videos every single day here on Theme Park Worldwide, not just our Remembering series, but we've got Planet Coaster, that's on every Wednesday. There's new top 10 videos, reviews, theme park news, and so much more. So stay tuned for that here on the channel every single day. Thank you very much for joining me, Sean Sandbrook, for the latest video in our Remembering series. And that leaves me with one final thing to say. If you can, get out there and keep on riding. See you soon.